At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Marissa to introduce us to today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presented by Diane Earp. Today's topic focuses on medical devices and will answer many questions that academic and small business entrepreneurs come to the Catalyze team with around partnering with external research or marketing or manufacturing organizations. I'm very lucky to have today's presenter, Diane, as a valued colleague and team member on the Catalyze program, where she serves as a technical project lead from the side of the Catalyze Coordinating Center. Diane is also the Vice President of Corporate Regulatory Compliance at RTI International, with over 24 years experience in regulatory affairs and quality assurance applicable to drugs, biologics, and medical device development. So with that introduction, I'm very happy to turn the webinar over to Diane.
Thank you, Marissa, and good morning and afternoon to everyone. It is my pleasure to get to talk to you about this very exciting topic, at least exciting to me. Wherever you are in the country, please enjoy your lunch or a break while we go through this stuff, and hopefully you'll get some benefit out of some of the kind of generalities that I've tried to pull together for you. A few disclaimers to start. The presentation aims directed at contract organizations in the development of medical devices. That's both research and manufacturing and also development. We'll talk about the different kinds of organizations. It's important to note that, though, that many times you've all heard me say, it depends. I know that's a horrible answer to be given, but that kind of fits in with the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to consider the elements, the risk profile, and the claims that are being made when you look at your medical device product development cycles to determine what's the best fit here. I'll give you some generalities. The cost estimates are based on very limited data. It's at least a few years old, and it varies greatly from organization to organization. So I tried to pick some examples that had been endorsed by government reporting. It's highly dependent, though, on the complexity of the activity and the classification, as I just said. So don't faint when you see some of these numbers because they may not in any way apply to the work that you're doing, but it does give you some idea as to where to kind of ballpark when you're trying to estimate what you're going to need with respect to costing. Next slide, please. As I said, limited work's been done to estimate the investments needed for the medical device to bring it to market. We talk in terms of development of a concept into feasibility and prototype, and then the transition into productization and commercialization. We're going to try to cover all elements in this presentation as to where you might find an organization outside of your own helpful to expedite, provide expertise, and help you get moving faster to that ultimate goal of a commercialized product. One study looking at longitudinal data, for example, is the Class 3, which is the highest risk medical device or in vitro diagnostic pre-marketed approval required, and concluded that the average out-of-pocket cost for this kind of a therapeutic device is around $54 million before conducting post-approval studies. That drives it up another $10 million, depending on what the agency's requirements are, stipulations, if you will, that are put on monitoring the product once it's out there. About 37% of your budget is going to be around the non-clinical stages related activities, 60% in the clinical stage, and that includes feasibility and pivotal studies. In some cases, clinical studies are not needed. In other cases, significant studies are needed. So that's where the variability comes in. This study said about 3% is associated with FDA review. I have, in my past, considered it up to 5 to 10%, depending on how complex the device is, how risky it is to patient safety, and the complexity of the requirements that are being met in order to get the claims that you want. Next slide, please. According to a July 2020, which again is already getting old, a class 2 medical device, which was our 510K or the Me Too classification that we look for the predicate to follow, is between 2 to 5 million for just the research and development tasks. The total cost to get it to product is around 30 million, a little cheaper than the class 3, but still a significant investment. The things that this study pulled out that I thought was interesting is that the largest impact on the overall development costs, and this would be where you really want to look at how you can get cost savings, is to consider simplified clinical trial protocols and reducing the amendments that you have to make. That has about a 33, almost a 35% or 34% increase on your impact of your development costs, and that means reducing those costs. Improvements in your FDA review efficacy and interactions, the efficiencies around the information that you're giving them is about another 22%. And that's something that we work to help you identify when to engage the agency to get an effective outcome, and what you need to give them a level of comfort. As I say, many of you have heard me say repeatedly, it's all about the risk. How do we convince the agency with data that the device is going to be safe and effective in what we are claiming that it can do? Use of an adaptive design in your clinical studies is also another area where you can get a significant reduction in your development costs. An adaptive design allows you to prepare in advance of execution of the trial places in which you will pause, look at the data, analyze it, and possibly pivot to a different directive. It's important that you get that identified up front when you will make those assessments, how you will keep from biasing the data, and also what actions you intend to take depending on what the data shows you. So it's a pre-assessed and defined upfront mechanism to pause, look at what you're seeing, and take it a different action. Strategies with the lowest development cost savings is really interesting as well. Many folks would argue that the use of electronic health records really gives you substantial savings. As you can see, it's only about 3%. Source data verification, again, about 6%. And the use of standardized contracts, about 8%. One has to consider with these elements of electronic records and source data verification, the elements of artificial intelligence and machine learning that's coming into play with so many of our devices these days. I think those numbers would be significantly different if we start to look at the impact of data analysis and source data verification when you apply some of those elements. So I would say, again, those strategies with the lowest expected cost savings need to be reassessed depending on what the need is that you're identifying with that data. Next slide, please. This is a design and development life cycle document that came out of the contract manufacturing report in 2023, so it's relatively new. But it's looking at your product design and development from how could contract organizations facilitate or help? Where are the control points that you want to look at and say, should we bring in another organization to help us? And I won't read the slide to you, but you can see that looking at it from the perspective of what is our objective in this area or in this phase, and how could we possibly get a better or faster or more efficient outcome with the assistance of a manufacturing organization or a research organization. So the slide is there just for your consideration as you look at your development subject criteria and then evaluate the need. Next slide, please. So what are contract organizations in the context of medical device development? They're clinical research services that are typical of most contract research organizations. Those include everything from regulatory affairs, which could be developing your pre-IDE, your IND, or your Q submissions to the FDA, setting up informational meetings, reviewing your data, preparing sections of the 510K or the complete package, an NDA submission, which is much more complex. It all varies with under the title of regulatory affairs, strategic planning, helping you address responses from the agency, and in some cases actually serving as the point of contact to engage with the regulators, interpret what they've said, and provide you with recommended actions to address their concerns. That can sometimes expedite, again, getting that product to commercialization marketing, which is kind of what this whole presentation is about. You can also get specific expertise with respect to data management, biostatistical analysis, and your clinical trial planning, development monitoring, and even project management. The Catalyze Coordinating Center provides many of these resources to you as a service that comes with your award, and we are happy to help you identify areas in where you might need additional support with our expertise. They can also, as a research organization, take the lead in just managing the company's trials and intricate medical testing responsibilities. That's also, again, coordination of a lot of different moving parts. The typical manufacturing organization provides services that actually occur when you are at design lock and ready to move on to those GMP manufactured lots. At this point, it's transitioning from what I consider research and development to moving into productization. Your design is locked, you know what you need. Now you need an organization to manufacture the product for you under GMP. Sometimes it's just a specific need that you have for packaging and labeling of your final product. Perhaps you can build it yourself, but you need them to perhaps either test it, provide key components, or the overall manufactured product, depending on your needs, or a service such as sterilization. There are a number of medical devices that once produced and packaged need to be sterilized, and that comes with very specific requirements that can be very costly to try to do as in your own operations. The typical contract development and manufacturing organization bridges beyond the design lock. So going backwards into, you may be having trouble coming to those final design specifications with a particular component that you need fabricated, or a problem with the actual execution of the prototype. Maybe it's failing in a certain respect or not meeting your expectations, and you need their help for an innovative development work. That's what this kind of organization, it's much more flexible, and it works with you to help you get past the block of how do I get to design lock. They're much more iterative. They have ideas and abilities to try different things to address whatever that issue is, whether it be a one-off component or whether you want to take it from concept and just have them turn it into reality. It's usually justified to be more economical or efficient to outsource. And the way you look at it in the development phase is, do we have the competency on our team, the equipment, and the resources to get this done to meet our timeline? Or can we outsource it and then move on from there? And that's where it becomes more of an integrated activity, and your contract much more important, which we're going to talk about shortly. Next slide. Patrick, could I have the next slide, please? So could you move back one? Okay, so thank you. How do we choose a contract organization, regardless of whether it's going to be for development, manufacturing, or research? The expertise and experience is really important. I can't stress this enough, that you want to make sure you're finding an organization that's done this before, has the talent and capability to run the tests, conduct the clinical trial, produce the component, You want to really do your research to make sure, beyond the fact that, oh, Dr. X has worked with them before and they're really nice guys, but they've never done this before. That gets you into a costly delay sometimes, and it becomes more training and execution as opposed to just using them as your expert to move things forward. It may not be worth it in some cases, but if you need a particular expertise and experience, take the time to find that in your contract organization. Assess their track records. What types of clients have they worked with in the past? That'll help you to assure their level of experience and competency. If they've not worked with a small company before, you'll find that sometimes they're reluctant because they don't see the value of their time and effort for a very minimal return on their investment in some cases. So you want to make sure you've aligned that experience and expertise that you're so that you're not adding more difficulties to already challenging situations in some cases. Quality and compliance. They need to demonstrate a strong commitment to quality by providing evidence of their compliance with regulations and standards. Whenever I qualify a vendor for someone, if they are reluctant to share with me that they have had an inspection by an agency or there have been issues with a particular aspect of their operation, and they don't want to talk about what they've done to correct it or responses to the agency, that's a red flag. They should be very forthcoming with process improvement, how their quality management system operates, and where they are certified and regulated. Review their quality management system. Have your quality person look at what that system looks like, any certifications they have to determine their level of competency. So you want to evaluate their commitment, how they respond to questions about how they work in quality and compliance, and also their system itself that's documented and in place. If they don't have a quality management system, you're not going to find that their work is consistent and controlled. That's always a good place to question. Cost and value for money. You need to look at it from a competitive standpoint and provide real value for your money. In other words, if they're going to cost you a significant amount, is it better to bring that expertise in-house, or is there someone else that might be able to do it more efficiently? Finding the expertise and experience is generally means that you're not going to have to pay for them getting up to speed on what you need them to do. They already know. They probably have established very efficient mechanisms in order to do it. So time and money will be balanced against those levels of expertise and quality competency. Ask for cost estimates for their services. In general, they try to resist giving you that without an agreed upon level of performance, but you should always get cost estimates and compare them to other CROs before you lock yourself in. Next slide, please. Communication and collaboration. This is very, very important. If your team doesn't feel comfortable with this organization, then regardless of whether it's research, manufacturing, whatever it's going to do for you, you're going to have problems. You want to make sure that you know how they respond to clients, how they speak with the team directly. You want to know how they interact. And the best way to do that is to get engagement with the actual CRO's team to assess their communication and collaboration skills. You can be very good at what you do, but if you don't communicate well, then you're not going to walk away with the relationship that you need in order to feel confident that your device is going to be defendable with the regulators. Timelines and flexibility. Delivering the services you need in a timely manner, and the flexibility to adapt when changes are needed or requirements must be altered. If they stick to, but this is not exactly what you told us before, and we're not going to make a change, then you don't have the right relationship, and that can be very costly. Adding it to their availability and their approach to managing timelines. If they don't have a good project management, they won't commit to timelines, or they constantly appear to have rationales for delays that just keep causing more and more deadlines to be missed, or they've demonstrated in the past an inflexibility. They don't have good change management. then again, that's a flag for you to consider this may not be the best fit. The facility locations. Locations where the work will be done is important to consider when you select a partner. You may talk to a headquarters somewhere and then find out that their intent is to have the work actually done at a different location under different management, a subsidiary perhaps, or one of their external locations that might even be outside the United States. If you look at the development costs, and the device you're developing is expected to be approved by a variety of nations or under different regulatory authorities, you may find it advantageous to find the CRO with experience and approvals in those particular locations. Facilities and staff positioned is important to know that they have the knowledge and the local regulations for clinical studies and device manufacturing, and the approval processes is very isn't unique to them. It's experience that they traditionally know how to work through. Will save you a lot of time and headache in trying to educate them or to make sure they haven't overlooked something if you get that expertise. And comparing global CROs and local CROs and assessing how much supervision is going to be needed on your part to determine how will help you understand and determine whether the location is going to be important in your selection or whether you can allow it to be more cost savings to move to some location beyond your reach. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So let's talk about the top 10 mistakes that are made when contract manufacturing is taken underway. Giving away too much of your product control during your contract negotiations. You want to be very clear on what your expectations are and that they know you still control the final decision making. Forgetting the benefits of a good contract manufacturing client relationship. It doesn't seem that important if you're not particularly thrilled with the way they're interacting with you or the delays that they're creating during initial engagement. But as time goes on and the criticality of your relationship with them starts to manifest, you'll see that relationship is very important. Realize that if you're manufacturing in a contract organization, the FDA is going to go there to inspect your product. The one thing you want them doing is assuring that their relationship with you is such that they're going to present it in the best possible light and defend its quality and state of compliance for you, because that's what they're there for. And you need to hold them accountable for that. Being lenient on setting the raw material quality standards can also present a big problem for you. If they start substituting raw materials or components, then you have a situation where they may have altered your product's performance, and now you're going to have to go back and deal with that and defend it. So you want to make sure that you are very specific in what you will accept and what they are allowed to substitute or include in your materials and components. Risking intellectual property loss. Sometimes we forget to ensure non-disclosure agreements are in place, restricted access, IP protection. You'll hear in most of our Catalyze projects, even at the kickoff, we start talking about, hey, have you taken action to protect your intellectual property before you go much further? Researchers in particular are driven to share information, and that's great. I'm all about communicating our findings, our conclusions, and improving healthcare delivery overall. But when you're working on something that's intended to move forward into commercialization, you need to be very careful about what you're disclosing out there to the world with respect to the specifics of your product. So again, consider not only your intellectual property protection with your manufacturing, but those out there that are looking either to that manufacturing organization for information or as you are presenting out to the world in your research. Not anticipating overseas cultural differences and challenges. That's something we tend to overlook. It's a big mistake. It sounds like you make an assumption that the organization that you are dealing with is understanding your expectations. Now they've put it in an overseas operation, subsidiary, or location, and now things have changed. And so the differences in the culture, the differences in understanding of the agreed upon elements, if it's not documented in your agreement, then there's a chance that things could go sideways, and it'll take a long and arduous process to figure out what happened and why the communications failed or the difference has occurred. Next slide, please. Poor handling of unanticipated project delays and manufacturing capacity constraints. You know, these are things that we see all the time, but we want to know up front, what is their redundant systems? What are their backups? And will they be able to deliver on time? Now, sometimes that comes down to supply chain issues, and those cannot be overlooked, but you do want to make sure that they have a contingency that keeps supplies available to meet your needs. They order in a way that they are able to produce and get your products out into the clinical studies or to meet the demands that you need for continued testing. If they are only purchasing supplies one off, then that's always a risk. So you want to look at their processes, how they are ensuring that they have the materials that they need to continue to ensure your project timelines are met. Using only one contract manufacturer for long-term production is never a good idea. That builds significant risk into your overall business plan. If you are solely dependent on one manufacturing operation and they go under, now where are you at? You need to make sure that you have backup and redundancy, maybe not on contract, but you know where you can get it and it is there, including all of your key components and elements of your device that would absolutely stop you from going forward. So you want to keep that as you move from product development into manufacturing commercialization, productization, I say, that you have identified all of the key elements and what your primary supplier is, as well as your backup. Losing flexibility and responsiveness, we've talked about that in a number of different parameters. Negotiating payment terms. If you don't set that up front, then you can get add-on costs and it becomes an ever-moving target that can actually create problems for you from a business perspective going forward. So make sure that the terms and conditions of your payments are very clear and what the deliverables are, as well as timelines. Losing money to generic products, that's always a risk and something we have to look out for. And that again is protection of your IP as well as your manufacturer's confidentiality of what you're doing. Next slide. So we've talked about all the mistakes that can be made and the issues. Let's talk about the benefits of contracting manufacturing organizations. It's pretty clear, cost, time, and expertise are the key elements. When you look at your team and you see that we're missing this piece of activity, sometimes it's not the best answer to hire another engineer or find a quality expert or get a regulatory affairs person on the team. You need to look at what you need from them, what the long-term effect is going to be, and how quickly you could get that person up to speed. It may be that ultimately you do need to find the appropriate person to add to your team, but getting them on board, getting them integrated into your operations can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. And if you're on a tight timeline, it may be better for you to contract that support, get that done, and move on. And GMP qualified facilities is a really important aspect that folks sometimes underestimate the impact. I've seen laboratories and universities say, we'll just develop the GMP operations, the manufacturing operations, excuse me, and we'll do it in our own labs. Once that can be done, it's not impossible. But when you start looking at the checks and balances, the document control, the required staffing, the cleanliness, the securities, the environmental controls, the safety elements, all of those start to come to bear. and it can get very costly very fast. In order to establish a GMP facility, you have to be ready for FDA inspection. You have to demonstrate that all of your systems, your training, your staff, your reviews, your quality management, your data controls, your batch releases, effectively, it is a huge undertaking. And so when I hear, well, we'll just manufacture the GMP products in our laboratories, I always challenge that. You could do it, but will you have everything there that you need in order to get an FDA inspection and to produce the GMP compliant materials? Internal product knowledge is also something that you have to consider. And all of this is sure that all of these benefits come to bear when you ensure that the signed master service agreement covers all of your intellectual property, your quality expectations, the time frame of delivery, formulation development, and any packaging needs. All of those things have to be addressed very succinctly. It's not something you want to come back later and try to integrate. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the benefits of continued benefits of contract research organizations. Understanding clinical research needs specific to the medical devices. This is something that's really important. The pre-market feasibility studies, pilot first in human studies, confirmatory studies, post-market, you can read all of this. These are some of the areas where they have the understanding of what is needed to meet the regulatory requirements in each of these aspects and can do this very efficiently for you. If you have the expertise and the availability, either through your universities or through your business, then obviously you don't need that. But they also bring to bear regulatory environmental expertise, and sometimes that can drive the difference between a protracted clearance or approval and an expedited one. So it's very important to ensure that you have the regulatory expertise and the specific needs for your clinical studies identified and expertise. It's not a matter of reading the guidance documents and trying to apply. There's a lot of underlying elements there. Each of the regulatory agencies, whether it's the UK, the EU, the FDA, Japanese, Chinese, Australian, each of these organizations have regulatory authorities that have different and unique needs. And for your medical device to be introduced to those environments, you need that expertise. Safety reporting in medical device trials is very specific, and that's somewhere else the clinical research organizations can be very helpful. Once your product gets to market, there is a specific requirement that's to look for any adverse events that the device affects, any deficiencies it demonstrates. There are very strict timelines and reporting for medical device events that occur, and it is something that you're required to do. It is a bit onerous. It requires good documentation, a little bit of pharmacovigilance understandings, and it could lead to your device being pulled off the market if not handled appropriately. So it is a pretty critical thing to consider. Next slide, please. Is that a repetitive slide? Okay, specific requirements of essential documentation. These again go back to the unique documents and requirements for medical devices. The guidance is pretty clear. The 510(k) submission process is also clear. They can support you by reviewing your documents to ensure that they meet the regulations and the standards so that you don't have to try to get up to speed on that. Medical writing services are also helpful to document the essential report. Therapeutic areas of expertise helps you improve the design and setup of your trials and reduces your training costs. If they have that knowledge, you have an advanced state of where you can go with getting things completed. Cost efficiencies. Look at their track record for approvals of similar kinds of devices or similar therapeutic indications. That lets you know that they now understand where the hot buttons are for the regulatory bodies, that they have a good understanding of what areas need to be documented and clearly supported with evidence. Is there a portfolio of the studies that the CRO has conducted with devices in the field that helps you know whether or not they really are the best fit for your product? Set realistic timelines and budget goals from the beginning. When you put that out there in your agreement, you want to make sure that they have reviewed them and can meet them and are willing to sign up for that. Um, and you want to look at the lessons learned from the CRO's experience to help you ensure your trial is conducted in the most cost-effective manner. It's all about time, money, and expertise. Those are the three key elements there. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some types of contract agreements, and these were focused on manufacturing, but they sort of apply for everyone. Some of the things you want to consider is private label agreements. These are long-term contracts to produce part or all of your product. The CMO creates the product that the business then sells on its own with their brand name. They do the whole thing. They hand it to you. You put your name on it, and it's your product. Private label manufacturing, end-to-end manufacturing, and select component creation is some of the benefits in this particular thing that you need to articulate clearly. Agreements for services and materials is another type of agreement. It involves the dealing with the labor and access to equipment. The CMO's team and facilities are used, but you manage the manufacturing operations. You're in this an agreement for services and materials. You're responsible for your product's release. Not all CMOs use the same equipment and materials, so you want to be very clear on that if you go in this direction. What material, what services are you specifically asking for, and how will the agreement reflect that you're getting quality performance, and how each party is going to conduct themselves needs to be very clear in that kind of agreement. In international agreements, it's much like the above options, but it's a third-party supplier that's overseas. And there are unique issues here, in particular when it comes to packaging and shipping it into the United States. You're now importing your materials. It can be difficult sometimes getting those in. Sometimes the environment shifts, and you have to look at whether or not your manufacturer is still able to even ship into the United States if we have restrictions. It can become a risk to your organization. It may prove less expensive, though, and depending on your specific requirements and needs and your backup manufacturing support, it may be a good possibility for you. Next slide, please. So this is going to stagger some folks. These are general calls for medical device development. I tried to put them in very generic terminology, but as you can see, it can be significant. Regulatory submissions are the one thing that folks sometimes seem to underestimate, because it's just a matter of packaging all that document together with completing each of the sections. But the reality is, depending on your indications for use and how the data supports, or whether or not there's some gray area in there, it can become an iterative process that requires back and forth and negotiation with the FDA, and can make the difference in your product getting to market in a timely manner versus extended and continuous frustration. Investors in particular get very concerned when the submission was made 90 days ago, nothing's been heard. The agency's asking questions. They want another meeting. They're requesting more data. They're asking for additional conversations. They want more information. You have to repackage. All of those churns make investors very uncomfortable, and small businesses can really start to feel the pain. So it's really important to have a good regulatory submission process, thought out, the strategy kind of aligning with your entire development process and then into your manufacturing and clinical study, so that you are building a relationship with the regulatory agency. They understand it's coming. They understand what you're trying to accomplish. You have already introduced to them what you believe your claims will look like and the kinds of data that you're bringing. They have already had the opportunity to express any area pain points that they might have concerns about. so that you have preempted that being a delay. The idea is to make that 510K submission, get that approved, and move on. In a class 2 situation, for example, as I was saying to someone the other day, the fastest I've ever gotten a 510K through was in 35 days, got approval. That was one in which we had engaged, were very clear on their expectations, provided them exactly what they had asked for, and the data clearly linked to what we were indicating this device could do. 90 days is the general timeline that one expects to hear back from the FDA with either we need more information, or a stop. If we haven't heard anything, then technically at 90 days, you're done. I have always insisted that you confirm that with your point of contact at the FDA in particular, because you don't want to move forward with what you believe is a cleared product when indeed they had already sent through a time hold and a request for additional information, and you just haven't received it yet. So again, that submission process, working interactively with your regulatory agency, can become very, very important. I could pick another element here. Hardware design, that can be something that you have addressed in your development activity, and you know what your hardware needs to look like, or it can be a situation where you're now outsourcing it. So that's another one that depends. It says 5 to 15,000. It could be much more than that, depending on the complexity of your device. Packaging is something else that can become an issue. Outsourcing that, or if you're trying to do it yourself, sterilization of the package once the device has been packed, sterilized, evidence to confirm that it is a sterile product now can sometimes become an issue for you, and it can be costly, because if it isn't sterilized appropriately, then you're looking at repackaging and re-sterilization. That can become an issue, quality problem as well. I could go through all of these, but I think you get the drift that it can vary tremendously depending on the complexity, the risk profile, and the who's doing what, if you will, for general. Next slide, please. So I've often asked, we're trying to find someone to help us with a specific activity that we don't have the expertise for. So I went out on the web and looked at a lot of our own internal sources and my own experience with some companies and organizations, and put together a list. It is important that you note this is not an endorsement. You need to have qualified your vendors under your own set of parameters of needs before you consider any vendor. I always caution when someone says, oh yeah, I worked with them before, they're great. Over time, things change, expertise leaves, organizations shift. So you need to qualify your vendor to your own expectations or your own specifications, both from a quality, regulatory compliance, and development and design expertise needs before you ever consider any of these organizations. But just in general, here are some contract manufacturing organizations that give you an idea of how specific they can actually be. If you look, these are molding components. Some have a full range of services. Some are design and manufacturing, as we've talked about before, the development and manufacturing organizations. Some specialize in a specific area, as you can see in Alcon Labs, it's surgical devices and equipment. Next slide, please. Some have customization and assemblies that for particular manufacturing and engineering. Others have more of a global perspective, and like manufacturing, assembling of all devices to high quality. Some are very specific, medical plastic injection molding producers and diagnostics. That's that thing again where we're looking for their overall expertise. And as you can see, Becton Dickinson pushes that it's ISO 13485 certified and compliant with FDA regulations. All of these should be able to say that if they're working in the medical device arena. But that was something they just promoted in their site. So moving to the next slide, please. some examples of research organizations, a little bit different here. ProPharma, Metacept, PowerExcel. These are organizations, as you can see, and I won't read it all to you, that have extensive experience in overall conceptual development through regulatory submission and product life. So the complete product life cycle, or in some cases, a specific niche within those cycles. Next slide, please. We have some that are more preclinical focused and others that are more clinical in nature. We have some that really are about the commercialization aspects and the marketing, government, public health organizations engagements, and some that provide you very specific commercialization insights and solutions to help you accelerate the success of your product as it comes out. Next slide. We have others that are very laboratory oriented and some that are decentralized networks across the world where you can get analytical testing and laboratory services or imaging, biologics, small molecule, medical device companies that kind of bridge all of those elements, combination products, for example, need the expertise, not only the medical device, but also the other arena. So looking at an organization that has cross-functional capability when you're looking at a combination product is important as well. Next slide. So in conclusion, it's one of those situations where all depends on what you need and what your device needs to be supplemented in moving from your research, feasibility, development into productization, commercialization. And obviously that includes your regulatory approvals. Once you have those, once you have that expertise, always make sure you have plan B and that you've really looked at an assessment of bringing to bear external resource, outsourcing these to contract organizations versus building that capability within your own company or within your own team resources. You want to think both short-term and long-term. Sometimes in the short term, it's good to outsource, but your long-term strategy with the introduction of your product and commercialization will be to bring it back inside. Other companies are very comfortable and continue to be very viable working with a lot of outsourced activities. When you look at that from a business perspective, though, when you have a significant level of outsourced activity, make sure that you have backup because that looks like a risk of failure in some investors' minds. So I would just say that you want to always say that, yes, we've outsourced it, but we have backups and we have plan B in the event that our product becomes extremely successful, which all of your products will, I hope. And maybe the manufacturing organization is overtasked to be able to meet the demands. You want to be able to know that they can gear up or that you have another source to meet the demands of success. And with that, I will thank you for your time and answer questions.
Thanks, Diane. So as Diane mentioned, we will now move into Q&A. We do have several in there. We will get through as many as possible in the next 6 or 7 minutes. So the first question here, does the Catalyze Coordinating Center offer a database of CROs to choose from in different device areas? I appreciate the guidelines on how to choose, but it's hard to choose without a list to choose from.
We do not endorse, nor do we have a complete database list because it always depends. And so what I would suggest to you is that if you have a specific need, we can help you search for the potential viable candidates. I've listed some for you out today that you can reach out to, get a non-disclosure agreement in place with them as you start to have conversations around your needs, and then apply your expectations. We'll be happy to help you assess once you've identified potential organizations that can help you. to determine whether or not it's a good fit. We can help you qualify your vendors. We can do that, but we do not provide vendors that we endorse.
Okay, the next question. Are NDAs always effective at protecting intellectual property, especially with CROs and CMOs in foreign countries?
That's a good question. Non-disclosure agreements and contractual commitments to protect your IP are always a first line of defense. And I encourage all of you to get those in place, because that's your ability to hire an attorney and file suit if they start, you find out they've disclosed inappropriately. Is that foolproof? Will people violate their agreements? Of course they will. And that's a part of that discussion of trust. So I would not walk in under a non-disclosure agreement and share everything. Remember the 10 mistakes that we make, that is giving away too much IP. You want to talk to these people about what you're looking for and have them ask questions, but remember, you're protecting your IP. Engaging in those kinds of conversations before you have ensured your IP is protected under your control is not a good idea. Now you're even more vulnerable. So you want to make sure you filed your IP, you are protected, get a non-disclosure agreement in place so that and if you're working with credible companies, then that should be enough. It is good business practice. It's something they expect. And let's face it, if this is a credible company and they didn't honor their non-disclosure agreements, they go out of business pretty quickly. So it is something you want to make sure is in place. You want to make sure that everyone's clear on what the discussions are that you feel are protected. You don't want to give them a lot of your documentation. I would start to question why they need it. You answer their specific questions, but you still take a guarded approach. Remember, it's your business, and those 10 mistakes we talked about kind of cover that a little bit. A little paranoia in this case is always good.
Okay, the next question. For the Catalyze preclinical application, how should quotes be handled from CDMOs who are managing third-party manufacturing and testing? Is a quote from the CDMO estimating these third-party services okay, or should a quote for each expected third-party service be submitted?
Well, it depends on your agreement and who's responsible for managing that third party. If the third party is a subcontractor of your contract manufacturing organization, they're responsible for their performance and their activities. They are assuming the costs that they have to pay those folks to do for you. If it's coming directly to you, then and you have to manage that piece of unknown. In other words, it's like the CRO is doing the work, but you also have a third party entity that you have to meet their demands, or you need to manage their activities. Then I would say you need a separate agreement there, and you want to have the say over what the costs are and that you've agreed to up front. I would never agree to something in which your contract organization is saying, we may have to outsource this, but we don't know what it'll cost. That's not a good answer.
Okay, we do have time for a couple more questions, but at this point, I'm going to open the feedback poll. So if you would take a moment or two to fill those out as we go through these last questions, the Catalyze program would greatly appreciate it. Our next question. Recently, I learned the difference between a guarantee and certification from an academic/research university. For the 501(k) clearance, is it necessary to start a startup company instead of staying in the academic environment? Or will it be practical to have a startup company due to potential legal issues?
I'm not an attorney, and I am going to defer that question because I think that is a very good question, but one that's very loaded. So I would suggest that you hire your own attorney to assess what are the risks around one option versus the other, and what actions you should put in place. There are good attorneys out there that help small businesses evolve. The SBIR organization is also a source for finding how do I get support, education around these kinds of elements. But Mike, if you have a better suggestion, please let me know. But I would say you really need legal counsel in order to assess that effectively, what's best for your company or your university.
Diane, I'll just add that if you're still an academic investigator, you should start with your tech transfer office, and that may be a good place to start.
Excellent point, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, next question. In slide 15, I didn't see any estimates of costs for animal model testing. Is that within the 50,000 you proposed for regulatory submission, or is that just for collecting or assembling documents?
That 50 is around collecting, assembling documents, and engaging with the agency. That can be very expensive. Animal studies fall under the preclinical. If you go back a couple of slides of feasibility, there was a percentage I gave you, I can't remember on which slide, that talks about kind of what to expect. Go on up back to where we're looking at medical devices. I think it was around 33% that you want to talk about. Let me see if I can find it. One more. Right here. Or is it the one in front of it? Go back, go one more, please. Yeah, there you go. Non-clinical stage includes animal studies, which would be about 37%. And again, that's a percentage of, in a class 2 device would be 30 million. In this particular class 3 device, it's 37% of 54 million. So there you go. So that's a rough estimate. Again, it depends on what clinical studies you need, how complex your device is, and how complex the study is. What animal model are you using? Mice is much cheaper than obviously a mammal or pig studies, those kinds of things. So that one is one where it depends. It really depends. And it also depends on the facility, the organization. As I said earlier, organizations' cost structures vary tremendously. So getting quotes is always a good idea. We do have experience with, in our preclinical aspects of this program, with identifying facilities for studies. So that is something that the preclinical side of Catalyze has a potential to help you with.
Thank you, Diane. That does bring us to the top of the hour. And I did want to turn it over to my colleague, Marissa, for just a few closing comments.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you very much again to our presenter, Diane. I just have a few reminders to share with everyone before we start logging off. We have an upcoming deadline for our product definition grant applications to the Catalyze program. So that deadline is coming up on February 21st. You can apply for the grant program through NIH Assist or grants.gov, and please feel free to reach out to us as you're preparing your application or to assess your technology's readiness and fit for the program. You can see our contact information at the bottom of this slide. And we have one more webinar in this series of CRO and CMO external partnerships, and that will occur on February 29th. And we'll cover partnering with contract organizations for CMC activities, so chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And like I put in the chat, we will follow up with any individuals that we were not able to answer your question live today due to timing. So just expect an email from somebody from our team. And thank you very much.